What's up guys, and thank you very much for tuning into this third video in my motivational series called How to Fly with a Clipped Wing. So far in the last two videos, I've talked a bit about how I've learned to adapt to life with one arm by looking at 5 different essentially elements or components that seem to always be in every situation along the way. And when I say adaptation, I don't just mean to the question of how do I do this or that with one arm, physically speaking, because I mean, in all fairness, there are a lot of things that a lot of people can do with only using one of their arms or one of their hands. But also from adaptation in the sense of on the mental side of things, I had to adapt to changes in my life that were going to happen with or without me liking it. Changes that didn't care about whether I wanted to face them or not, and admittedly there was a lot of not confronting going on for the first few years after the accident occurred. Life with one arm, paralysis, nerve pain was not coming, it was here, and it was here to stay. Even in the beginning, it was apparent to the neurologist and other doctors that, you know, at a minimum, the overwhelming majority of this nerve damage was irreparable, short of what could maybe be worked on experimentally. These 5 elements, which I had to later learn that I was in control of, were firstly, the patience that I would have or not have with something. Secondly, the type of perspective that I had on the situation, whether it was a healthy perspective or an unhealthy perspective. There was the presence or an absence of a positive and affirming mindset. There was a willingness or a lack of willingness to persevere through the tough situation. And then lastly, there was either a presence or an absence of things in my life that I was passionate about. And in this video, I'll be talking a bit about perspective and changes to my perspective that I've experienced as I've gone through life after the motorcycle accident. My hope is that by sharing these experiences with you in this video and in future videos, and also how I worked through them by aligning my decision making with these 5 elements, or what I call the 5 Ps, that you will be guided to discover your own ways of overcoming your own obstacles that life puts in front of you. With certainty, my observations are my own and definitely are not the one-size-fits-all word-for-word answers. But my thinking is that no matter what our situation is, that at one point or another we all must contend with these 5 elements. So I might as well at least try to inspire you to make your own call to action by listening to my own methods. So perspective. And I also like to think of perception as well as a sub-P sort of thing. And by perspective, I mean the awareness that we ideally have on how we think about the things that we think about, how we process the things that we see. Let me elaborate with an example here. After my amputation, the first thing I wanted to do was go run. I wanted to run so far and so hard that I passed out. And that's right, willingly make myself pass out. I was that excited about going running again. With my arm paralyzed over the 6 years before the amputation, the arm had severely deteriorated down to the bones, basically no muscle left. And my joints would dislocate. Even if I laid down, I could barely walk for longer than 5 or 10 minutes without my shoulder sliding apart, coming apart. I'd have to cradle my elbow like this and force the ball and socket together to pop it back in. So it was gnarly to experience it, especially that often. With this deterioration and continuously happening, running and physical exercise was absolutely out of the question. And 6 years of that type of limitation is a long time for somebody to get used to, especially from being able to run and surf and ride motorcycles whenever I really wanted. So after the amputation relieved me of that ball and chain, so to speak, all I wanted to do was run myself to exhaustion. And with that context, it's like, yeah, no kidding, right? So I was given a pair of running shoes as a gift for Christmas the same year of my amputation, which was so awesome. And I put them on that same evening, and I definitely ran until I almost passed out, although far, that I'm not too sure about. In fact, what I am sure of is that I made it past like the first 2 houses up the street before the thumping lightheadedness of passing out came over me. And I sat there on the sidewalk, and while I recovered, I was so upset with myself and my physical condition to not do even remotely what I had set out to do. My perspective was focused on the past and what I had remembered running was like. My perspective was focused on what I had envisioned myself doing. My soul was just absolutely parched for it. I sat there feeling just as debilitated as when I had my arm, and I was pretty down on myself about it. I felt really sad, especially to have failed, or at least perceived myself to have failed, to do something that I had envisioned and used as even reasoning for the amputation to begin with, as I'll cover in future videos on the decision to amputate on its own. But it was a huge factor, this idea of being able to run, you know, as much as I wanted. And as my perspective started to shift from focusing on unrealistic expectations for myself to another negative perspective based on fear and sadness, I wondered, would I never run as I had first envisioned? Would I never again make it past the first 2 houses up the block? Would I never again feel the blissful soreness of aching muscles after a great run instead of this dreadful respiratory soreness of the lungs that seemed to restrict me, at least similarly to the way that my arm once did? I felt that I had let myself down, and later on I realized that at least one thing that was wrong with how I had considered that situation that night was my sense of perspective and what my perspective was focused on or based on. It was unrealistic for me to hold myself to the impossible standard of doing something super proficiently that I haven't been able to physically do at all in 6 years. It just didn't make any sense, and I was doing it all to myself. My perception as well of what I should have been able to do, or what I expected myself to be able to do, was all wrong. And I could feel my perspective starting to change at this point. I realized to myself, hey, you're in control of the standard that you set for yourself. You're in control of the factors that you consider as you construct in your mind's eye what you envision for yourself and what you decide to really go after. I realized, why would you set yourself up for failure based on an envisioned ideal that wasn't even at all existent in reality? Why would you put the bar up so high and choose to want something so far beyond even the horizon? You don't even care. You just know that you want to run and run and run. Like, no. The correct perspective was this. Dude, you ran at all for the first time in 6 years, okay? Simple as that. My awareness of how I thought about my physical constraints at the time helped me realize that I had actually just broken huge ground in being able to take those first steps in any type of stride in so long. The change to a more healthy perspective helped me realize that I just needed to set many short-term goals over time for success, rather than one huge unrealistic goal over a super short period of time, namely immediately. I realized that in the moment that night I was so consumed with my failure to achieve an impossible standard that I didn't even realize that I had succeeded in achieving something truly awesome, running at all and having a starting point to work with, rather than when I had my arm and it wasn't even a possibility. So when it comes to working on becoming more aware of your sense of perspective on what you're going through and how it affects your perception of yourself, the main thing to remember, I think, is to keep the perspective healthy. Don't be the me that perceived myself to be a failure because I didn't rise to the occasion of an ideal that was destined for failure upon its inception. Don't be the me that held on to an unhealthy perspective that focused on what I had envisioned I should have been able to do, which then blinded me from appreciating what I was actually able to do, and then going from there to do what was necessary to, in this case, run farther and farther each time. And whenever I forget to do this, I just remember some powerful words that I heard Tony Robbins once say. He said, "You've got to see things the way that they are, but not worse than they are. Then see it better than it is, because that's what's missing so often, is vision." And I I love these words, especially about one's perspective. With a healthy perspective and with disciplined patience, the realistic short-term goals that I've learned to set are how I've been able to see things the way they are, and then how to see it better than it is, as Tony Robbins would say. It's how I've been able to envision things for myself in a more healthy way, and then feel fantastic about achieving them. These short-term goals have gotten me to the point where I can play soccer 3 or 4 times a week now, running distances of a bit farther than 2 houses up the street, I'd say. A healthy perspective is so important for someone to try and maintain because, in my opinion, it's how you develop a positive and affirming mindset, which will be what the next video is about. And the positive mindset is important to have about what you're doing and what you know for a fact is possible for yourself, regardless of what others think or might say about what it is that you're trying to achieve. Over this next week, I'm asking you to look at the tough situations that you're in, that you might find yourself in, and think about this video and the last one. Remember to strive to be more patient with yourself than before, and then with that time that you afford yourself with that disciplined patience, take a step back and re-examine your perspective and your perception on the situation. What is it that you find your perspective is characterized by? Is it a perspective based on negativity, what you can't do or what you don't have, or how something never seems to work out? Or is it a perspective that's based on what you do have at your disposal to work with? Is it based on your abilities rather than your inabilities? Or how far you've come maybe from where you first started working towards something? Or is it based on words of encouragement from your friends or your family that you needed to listen to more closely? Is it a perspective based on an understanding of setting realistic goals, realistic short-term goals for yourself to achieve something greater? Give it some thought this week and let me know what you've been going through. To do this, feel free to check out my website for more background information, motivational content, and my motivational speaking services. Check out my Facebook page, follow me on Twitter, and please comment, like, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. All the links for this stuff can be found in the description below. Have a great day, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week and in upcoming videos as we work together through life's tough situations that can otherwise really weigh us down. Or, in other words, how we can fly despite our clipped wings. See you in the next one.